doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.
Hello everyone, welcome. My name is Rebecca Shirley. I'm the Deputy Director for Africa at the World Resources Institute. And I want to welcome you to the African Investment Earthshot Leaders Summit. Thank you so much for being with us. Every event I've been to, I've been telling people thank you for being here with a very genuine thank you, because you could literally be in 1,000 other places right now. And you chose to be in this room, so thank you for that. And we're looking forward to a very wonderful afternoon. The focus of this year's inaugural African Climate Summit, which many of you perhaps were at, was to demonstrate, to articulate the investment opportunity that the African continent represents as a climate solutions destination for itself and for the world. We all know Africa's vast natural clean energy resources. We all know of its critical mineral stock, this continent alone holding 1/3 of all critical minerals across the globe. We know of Africa's dense carbon sinks, its mangroves and peatlands, in fact holding at any time at bay 3 full years' worth of global emissions. We know of our endless tracts of arable land and our 700 million hectares of degraded forests and farms waiting to be nursed back into productivity. The resources and opportunities across the continent are endless. And that is not at all to even speak about our young and ever-growing younger population. 10 million young people pouring onto the job market every year. The perfect ingredients to grow bustling urban hubs of green industry and economic sectors of sustainability, from restoration to circular food production, community forest enterprise, urban mobility, and more. Creating thriving economies and ways of dignified, meaningful jobs for young people, all while helping the world to decarbonize, helping to build healthy, resilient cities, and revitalizing our landscapes, the very climate armor that's going to protect us into the future. That's the narrative. That was the narrative at the summit. That's the narrative that we've been promoting across many platforms of African climate leadership this year. And it is indeed codified in the Nairobi Declaration. But achieving this vision is going to require a tectonic transformation in the way that we attract investments to the continent. Today, Africa stands at about 4% of global climate finance. And with all of this energy potential, we attract about 2% of global clean energy finance to date. In fact, it's actually less than that. We're about 0.6 clean energy finance globally. At the same time, we know that that is not even half of the 25 billion per year that the IEA finds the continent will need to achieve its goal of energy access for all by 2030. And clean energy is perhaps our most, and arguably our most commercial sector, ready for investment. So what would we say for the rest? And therefore, as a transformation is necessary, it's something that we have to think about. And as President Ruto said when officiating the Africa Climate Summit, it is a task and a test of our collective will and ingenuity. So understanding exactly what drivers will allow Africa, with all of this abundance, to sit at 4% of global climate finance and 2% of clean energy finance, that's the work to be done. And that's the work that we're here for today. We want to importantly understand these barriers and take the actions to unblock greater flows of investment and finance to the continent. And thankfully, we have leading global and Pan-African institutions ready at the helm, up to the task of convening us in order to do so. And that's what we're here for at the African Investment Earthshot Leaders Summit. Today, we are going to invite leaders to share a new African Investment Earthshot vision and narrative with us to all get behind. For Africa's at-scale investable contribution and benefits from its increased participation in the $10 trillion per annum and growing green industrial economy. We're going to figure out how to accelerate the decarbonization of the continent and the world at industrial scale. And we're going to figure out how we turn all of this opportunity into practice, into proposals. So thank you again for joining us. I'm going to be your moderator for today, and I want to invite up our first speaker. Our first speaker for the afternoon is His Honorable, His Excellency, Sheikh Shakbut Nanyan Al Nanyan, the Minister of Foreign Affairs for the United Arab Emirates. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, but I truly just want to make a clear message. I'm not the foreign minister. I am Minister of State in the Foreign Ministry that is dealing with, in this case, Africa file. But thank you very much. And I also want to note that the finance for Africa is 1.6%. That's only for COP.
Yes, that's true. Yes.
So
It's higher now.
with all the generous announcements and funds that have been introduced and led by the UAE presidency, I'm sure there will be a drastic change in that. And my country, the leadership of Science fully supports financing globally, but specifically in Africa, due to the vast need and opportunity. So, allow me to begin. Excellencies, honorable ministers, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the United Arab Emirates and the COP28 presidency, I would like to express our pleasure to be co-hosting the Africa Investment Leaders Summit and NDC Investment Awards. Let me begin by congratulating Egypt for hosting an outstanding COP28 presidency, which has provided the UAE with a solid platform to build our ambitious COP28 presidency upon. The UAE wholeheartedly believes that the future success of international, multipolar, climate change, and SDG investment agenda is dependent on Africa. Bringing and packaging is unique and abundant combination of human, financial, and natural capital assets and advantages to the table. Over the past few days, the UAE has pledged $200 million to bolster climate resilience in vulnerable countries and welcomed the $750 million on climate solution investment platform announced by InvestCorp, an alternative investment management firm, as part of its collaboration with Innovate for Climate Tech, a coalition between Masdar City, Tencent, and Catalyst that has facilitated by the COP28 presidency. Our presidency also unveiled $1.7 billion in nature conservation finance, which cements the role of nature in climate action from COP28 to COP30. Through this vehicle, the UAE will contribute $100 million of new finance for nature climate projects, with an initial of $30 million investment in the Ghanaian government's Resilience Ghana plan. So there we go. I very much hope that many of our partners and international friends would be part of this coalition. The COP28 presidency also unveiled the Global Decarbonization Accelerator, a series of landmark initiatives designed to speed up the energy transition and drastically reduce global emissions, which has been informed by the thinking of key stakeholders, including international organizations, government policymakers, NGOs, and CEOs from every industrial sector. One of the UAE's global climate investment agendas and a COP28 presidency central goal is supporting the continent in establishing the African green industrial infrastructure as the enabling political framework equivalent to successful global investment Earthshots, such as America Inflation Reduction Act and Europe Net Zero Industry Act, through initiatives like, but not limited to, Etihad 7 and the UAE Africa Green Investment Initiative. Under the leadership of His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, President of the United Arab Emirates, the UAE is working extensively to ensure we strengthen and build a prominent and Catholic regional Africa Investment Earthshot partnership, which is what I am going to announce here today. The UAE Africa Investment Earthshot symbolizes UAE's long-term partnership commitment to co-development and invest at scale with Africa as equal economic partner and beneficiaries in green industrialization, green infrastructure, and energy development, whilst we simultaneously forge global market access at industrial scale for Africa and UAE manufactured and processed green technologies, goods, and services. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, the UAE also welcomes Africa's climate investment statesmanship and leadership exhibited especially by His Excellency William Ruto, President of the Republic of Kenya, amongst many other respected African leaders we are privileged to work with. To make this a meaningful institutional investor-public partnership, we especially welcome the calls for establishment of the Heads of State of Africa Climate Investor Coalition during the COP28 presidency led by the African Union Development Agency through its Continental Business Network, which is championed by President Julius Maada Boyo of Sierra Leone and President William Ruto of Kenya, and the domestic and global institutional investment community representing over 100 trillion US dollars assets which is under management, coordinated by our co-host partner, Africa Investor. We, as UAE and COP28 presidency, welcome the opportunity of our heads of state and sovereign fund leaders to be part of this bilateral coalition of heads of state and institutional climate investor coalition, to engage and mobilize global investment community and African and global heads of state in collaboration with and during the COP28 presidency to close Africa's $3 trillion US dollars plus climate and SDG private capital investment gap through institutional investor public partnership. Friends, partners, and colleagues, the UAE as a government and COP president is looking forward to being front and center with the partners delivering this ambitious and timely, realizable, and elegant Africa investment Earthshot paradigm to mobilize trillions of domestic and global private capital to African green industrial infrastructure, establishing it as a globally competitive, investable asset class. With the Nairobi Declaration as the enabling political framework and delivered through institutional and investor-public partnerships.
I want to introduce now our next speaker. Our next speaker is His Honorable Excellency, Her Honorable Excellency, Ms. Naros Beckley Thomas, the Chief Executive Officer of the African Union Development Agency, AUDA NEPAD. His Excellency Sheikh Shakut Nayan Al-Nahyan, Minister of State of Foreign Affairs, UAE, His Excellency Adnan Amin, CEO of 28th Presidency, Honorable Ministers, and the former President of Malawi, Madam Joyce Banda, my sister was here, Dr. Hubert Dedanso, Chairman of the AU Continental Business Network, Dr. Kandi Mikela, former UN Under Secretary General and Special Representative of the UN Secretary General, and I should
are all the representatives here, ministers, and representatives of the President of Namibia and Sierra Leone. Is it good morning or good afternoon? I'm just lost because people run from one to the other, so whatever it is, I just want to salute everybody that is here. As you know, and for so long, Africa has been at the wrong end of international climate finance. The continent's climate financing is estimated, it just varies from one session to the other, but I would say to $2.5 trillion between 20 and 2030. If we look at the NDCs, it comes to around $3 trillion, which averages $250 billion per year. However, only 12% of that total amount climate finance flows into Africa. We hope that COP28's pledges will be realized and not add up to the promises of the past, the unfulfilled promises of the past. The Nairobi Declaration, which was really a big success of the Africa Climate Summit, called for Africa to take the lead in the development of global standards in their metrics and market mechanisms. And part of the market mechanism include the carbon markets and institutional investor-public partnership for private capital mobilization goals. The African Investment Earthshot, the AIE, and its work with the African and global institutional investment community through the AU Continental Business Network's 5% agenda, that is our NIPAS, actually, 5% agenda, and the CBN is helping us in that, and we are so grateful, Hubert, for all the work that you're doing, is really determined to fill significant finance gap in the continent. The Excellencies, the partnership is in the process of establishing an African green industrial infrastructure as a globally competitive investable asset class, servicing the 10 trillion per annum and growing global green industrial economy with the Nairobi Declaration as the enabling institutional investor-public partnership instrument driving private capital mobilization at scale, equivalent to America's Inflation Reduction Act and Europe's Net Zero Industry Act. And ladies and gentlemen, our NIPAD is committed to this ambitious and timely Africa Investment Threshold Allocation Plan and process. This included the provision of the requisite climate investment statesmanship and working together as an institutional investor-public partnership coalition to align and create the conditions to mobilize the domestic and global multi-trillion pools of institutional climate capital at scale. The resources will facilitate the establishment of African green industrial infrastructure as a globally competitive, investable asset class. In all this, ladies and gentlemen, Africa's youth should play a critical role in sustaining the success and global competitiveness of African green industrialization as an investable asset class, and ours Energize Africa initiative will therefore work closely with the African Investment Earthshot to ensure the youth are properly and appropriately integrated. Our NIPAD applauds the COP28 presidency for its vision and partnership on this Africa Investment Earthshot initiative. With us at the African Union, the presidency's vision aligns seamlessly with the aspiration of the African Union, creating a powerful synergy that leverages collective strengths. The dedication to fostering a partnership that transcends traditional boundaries underscores a shared commitment to sustainable development, economic growth, and environmental stewardship. We in our NEPA would ensure that this new institutional investor-public partnership is well reflected in our program delivery report at the upcoming AU Heads of State Summit in 2024, just on the 18th of February, and building momentum throughout and in collaboration with the COP28 presidency, with formal progress reports being presented at COP29 and the next African Climate Summit. I would like to really end by saying that, our government, is ready to really take this to a higher step and to make sure that this is implemented. We've been talking and talking for a long time, and now action is clearly, needed, and we need to really take that action, at the pace that is, unparalleled. So we are very ready and we're building capacity. And not only that, we would like really all of us collectively to make sure that these pledges that we've been hearing, the figures that we've been hearing right and left, are come to Africa. Africa is there, we have the capacity to realize the program. And in the realization of the program, it's not only for Africa, but for the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency Kelly Thomas, for that. Thank you for establishing the vision for us. This formal establishment of the African green industrial infrastructure as a globally competitive investment asset class. These are the first steps to turning the narrative of Africa's potential as a solutions hub into reality. So thank you for that. And thank you for the commitment to African leadership through the 5% agenda, and ensuring that Africa's domestic institutional investors are equally able to support the growth of our infrastructure class. Thank you for that. Before we move on to moderate the panel, I want to invite up our last introductory speaker. This one is a real true honor. We have with us Mr. Adnan Amin, the CEO of COP28.
Your Excellencies, esteemed leaders, distinguished guests and friends, let me first thank Dr. Lados Bekele for really inspiring comments and a vision for transformation for Africa that you laid out. We resonate with that vision and we will be partners with you in that vision. But let me also take this moment to recognize two very special people. And my brothers, we started discussing the idea for this forum almost a year ago. I will not say they harassed me at some point in the year, but Kande Yukela and Hubert Danso, they are the moving force behind the inspiration for this series of events that we have. Thank you so much for your vision and your energy and your commitment. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, welcome to COP28, COP of action, and a COP for the Global South, where we don't only wish to talk about change, we want to catalyze and ignite it. If you look at the achievements, a historic agreement on loss and damage with over $700 billion in pledges already, $12.7 billion in pledges to the Green Climate Fund, resounding commitments by over 100 countries on tripling renewables and doubling energy efficiency. A new vision on climate finance, the UAE declaration on a new global climate finance framework that brings major world leaders together and puts forward core principles to make finance more accessible, more affordable, and sustainable. A US $30 billion fund announced by the UAE, Altera, the world's largest private investment vehicle for climate action that aims to mobilize $250 billion by 2030 and focus on transforming emerging and developing markets where traditional investment has been lacking so far. You can already see you were getting ready for this engagement. And the launch of the Africa Green Industrialization Initiative by the President of Kenya, William Ruto, that aims to hyperscale green businesses and industries in Africa and break the chains of raw material export dependency that have stalled Africa's development for so long. The Africa Green Industrialization builds on the success of the Africa Green Investment Initiative launched earlier this year by the UAE and the Africa Climate Summit that has already allocated more than half of its $4.5 billion commitment for power projects across 8 countries that will add approximately 1.8 gigawatts of clean power capacity to the African grid. The convergence of these initiatives signals a paradigm shift for Africa's energy landscape, ushering in an era of prosperity driven by green industrialization. This is the point of inflection that we have reached. Excellencies, leaders, distinguished guests. The Nairobi Declaration at the Africa Climate Summit highlighted that the energy transition is an opportunity for shared prosperity. Africa has the potential to be the global trailblazer for the energy transition and for green industrialization. In fact, green industrialization is a battle cry for delivering Africa's socio-economic transformation by bringing together environmental stewardship and economic progress. It offers a pathway for sustainable and inclusive growth while powering the development of new industries, creating economic diversification and jobs. The African continent has the world's greatest green resources, including renewable power potential, but also critical materials needed to power not just homes, but Africa's green industrialization. Some projects moving forward are already coupled with green steel, sustainable mining, and processing, and this needs to be scaled up. To achieve green industrialization, we must build innovative and transformative policies to pursue low carbon growth and unlock sources of capital. Firstly, we must tackle policies and systemic level changes. Many governments across Africa are working diligently towards green industrialization, building long-term energy transition programs, and the political groundwork required to drive the necessary reforms. We call upon international partners to step up and to lend a hand. Secondly, we must unlock the private sector at the scale and speed required by deploying appropriate financial instruments, de-risking instruments, and blended finance solutions. We must restore the financial sustainability of local utilities and invest in modernization of the energy infrastructure. And let me underline the importance of the investment in infrastructure, which will enable so much of this to happen. Lastly, we must reform the global financial architecture to include access to more sustainable finance. Pension and sovereign wealth funds in emerging markets are already providing long-term capital for investment, but more is needed. Financial regulators and credit rating agencies must work with financial institutions to support a more investor-friendly regulatory framework, and this will enable transformational projects to be launched and to attract private investment. Scaling up private capital will also ensure that countries do not confront the climate battle with one hand tied behind their backs, encumbered by debt. Making adequate levels of finance available to all by releasing the full force of the private sector, will reignite collective global green industrialization, support and accelerate the drive to net zero, and create jobs and prosperity. And we all know that a young and growing population in Africa, one of the critical aspects that we need to address, is employment today. This is the existential battle of our generation, and the challenge is too big and too important for us to fail. The Africa Investment Earthshot Leadership Summit clearly demonstrates that this is possible. I call on partners in this room to unite, to act, and to deliver a transformative cycle of change that will achieve Africa's green industrialization in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for affirming the COP28 presidency's commitment to Africa and to advancing the African investment Earthshot under this presidency and carrying through to COP29. So today is all about how we turn the narrative of Africa's investability as a green industrial solutions hub for the world into an actual reality. We've already heard some very promising announcements of what this is going to look like in its first iteration. Let's now talk about how we strategize to use this momentum for catalyzing transformational mobilization of finance for the continent. There's perhaps no one better to lead us in that conversation than the man himself, Dr. Hubert Danso, the chairman of the African Union Continental Business Network, able, as the president said, to turn diplomatic harassments into partnership. Thank you, Hubert, for everything that you've done to get us to this point. I'm going to invite you to chair the next session.
So, as my good colleague mentioned, my name is Dr. Hubert Danso. I'm the CEO and Chairman of Africa Investor. I have the privilege of chairing the African Union's Continental Business Network, as well as the African Pension and Sovereign Wealth Fund Leaders Summit. I think you might gather from some of those titles that we spend a lot of time really trying to bring the private sector, in particular the institutional investment community, who we believe have incredible and immense promise to enable the continent to turn the tide in this whole issue of mobilizing private capital at scale. And through the likes of the work that the good CEO, the assistant from African Union Development Agency, has put in place through the 5% agenda, we now have a framework under an institutional investor-public partnership to actually be able to do the speed. The speed that we're talking about is essentially a collaboration between private capital and public and institutional leaders. So we're very grateful to you, Honourable CEO, for your leadership. We continue to walk side by side with you on this, and I think the difference now between talking about scale and making pledges is perspective and direction. And the idea of this particular panel is not to have an illusionary, where are the trillions, do they exist, can they be leveraged from existing traditional sources, but to engage the trillions. And I can confidently tell you that that's what this panel represents. This panel represents the trillions. This panel represents institutions that have a long-term and a long-standing commitment and belief in Africa as a transformative catalyst that will not only transform the continent, but also become a real player in terms of decarbonizing the world at industrial scale. And we think the framework to accomplish that is an African investment Earthshot. An African investment Earthshot is no different in many respects to the thinking and the principles driven by the global investment Earthshots. And I think, as the Honourable Chairperson and CEO has already said, the way has been shown to us in terms of how the United States have delivered their own investment Earthshot, called the Inflation Reduction Act. The Inflation Reduction Act in the last 12 months, in September, they did a stock take. Within that 12 months, they mobilized $500 billion, which is essentially almost 10 times more than our own foreign direct investment over the last 10 years. So we think that's a good model for us to be able to segue and take a slightly different path. The European version, which we've heard colleagues mention, is the Net Zero Industry Act, which we believe has also sent a very positive market signal to the institutional investment community. So this particular panel, we're going to be focusing on two things. How do we engage colleagues that have that expertise, that long-term perspective, as well as the balance sheets, to help us design that plan almost as a Sustainable Development Goal 17 collaboration. So I'm very pleased to have a number of colleagues that are going to work with us now to put together the investment allocation plan for the Africa Investment Earthshot. It's more like a consultation. We're going to be sharing some very high-level ideas about how we can potentially give the appropriate foundation for the Earthshot's investment allocation plan, and what type of process we can put in place to support what the sort of colleagues have set out. African Union heads of state will be briefed on this, and I can assure you, when the Honourable CEO puts something in front of the heads of state, they expect action, they expect delivery. So this is really, Honourable CEO, to let you see that you have a good and deep bench, if you like, of keen and supportive institutional investors that will walk that journey with us. So, and who are they? Let me just quickly introduce them to you. We have Rich Newsom, who is the Executive Director for Investments at Mercer. He's a Global Chief Investment Strategist there. Morning or afternoon, around the applause would be great. We also have Lucy Modesta, who is the Principal Executive Officer of the Government Employees Pension Fund of South Africa, which is South Africa's and Africa's largest pension fund. We have Dr. Vera Songwe, who is about to come onto the panel, but she's here and we recognize her. She's the founder and chair of the Liquidity and Sustainability Facility. We have Mr. Gunter Talina, who is from Allianz, who's now a board member, and he is the chair of the United Nations convened Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance, which represents the global institutional investment community, representing over $20 trillion of assets under management. We also have Mr. Solomon Asamoah. Yes, thank you. We have Mr. Solomon Asamoah, who is the CEO of the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund. We have Mr. Ayman Solomon, who is the CEO of the Egyptian Sovereign Wealth Fund. I think we, at some point, will have Dr. Mo Ibrahim, so, is he here? I see, okay. Well, we're recognizing and let that be a little thing to come with us. Dr. Mo Ibrahim, who's the chairman of the Mo Ibrahim Foundation. And we'll just finish off with Eric Crichton, who is the Director for Business Relationships at CDPQ. But I'd like to also recognize as well our good colleague from the NDC Partnership, the Global Director, Mr. Pablo Vieira. You know, we always talk about mobilizing investment at scale, but we need projects to be able to invest in. And that's what the NDC Partnerships represents and stands for. So I'm going to let us go straight into this conversation and really just call on you, Pablo, just to give your views. I know that you're also required elsewhere. But let me put it this way, I'm going to pose this sort of question to you, and I think we often hear there's more than enough money in the market, where are the bankable transactions? So my question to you is, how do you feel about the array of tools that you have at your disposal to work in support of this investment Earthshot with the institutional investment community, or any ideas that you would have that could feed into the pipeline development component of the Earthshot investment plan? So over to you.
Thank you so much, and first of all, congratulations, Hubert. This is an impressive effort, and we're very happy to be working with you very closely. As you frame it, it depends on who you talk to. If you talk to investors, they will say, where are the projects? If you talk to the countries, they will say where is the money? So that's the biggest challenge that we have. Countries feel that they have strong climate commitments, that have identified strong actions to move them forward. They can't access the money. While the investors will say, there's so much money, where are the projects? And it's a reality. It's not two different stories or two different points of view. It is a reality. And what we need to do is to work together to bridge that gap. And that's where the work of the NDC partnership with the developing countries will bring them closer to the sources of finance. And you, with your efforts and with this great idea, will bring the financiers closer to the countries. We both need to move from where we are, because if not, this gap will never be bridged. We're supporting over 90 countries around the world, including 40 countries in Africa. And what we're learning is that countries need the right tools, the right capacity to be able to move forward. They know what they want, what they need. They have sent strong messages through their nationally determined contributions, their NDCs, in terms of the direction of travel for their climate ambition. In those, they reflect the sectors and the activities that need to be financed. They have identified certain projects, many of which will be recognized later today in terms of those actions that will be transformational on the ground, but they still need technical assistance and support to be able to meet financiers where they are. Projects are not designed or developed to the level of maturity that will effectively mobilize finance. Maybe in some cases they will be able to go to the GCF and get some money, but from there to being attractive to the private sector, there's a big gap. And we also need mechanisms on the other side that will allow countries to be able to more effectively mobilize finance through the management of the risk associated or perceived risk associated with the mobilization of finance from the private sector, for example. So we need to put together the different pieces of the puzzle that will start with an idea, included in an NDC, to the right enabling environments, policies, legal frameworks, to the development of projects, to the mapping of the adequate sources of finance, to the blending, and then to the private sector. That is the job. And all of us need to work together so that we can provide the support to the countries in all the different stages of the process. If we forget any of those stages, we will still have the same conversation. There's a lot of money, no projects. There's no money and a lot of projects. So that is the responsibility that we need to work on together.
Thank you very much, Pablo. That's a really specific and clear way. I think one of the things that we're talking about, and that's why our partnership has been so strong over this period, is the willingness to sort of look at curating partnerships in a different way that partnerships evolve. And I think the ability to collaborate with the investment community in the context of our portfolio companies having the expertise to actually be able to come in right at the formational stage and actually help to develop those projects in a bankable way, we think it could also be a very powerful contribution towards that work, and you can count on us to continue in that direction. So let me now come to Rich. We talk about the trillions, but I think this is an individual and an institution that routinely and daily advises trillion-dollar portfolios around the world. So let me come to you, Rich. You talk about asset allocation, African green infrastructure as an investable asset class. You know about the Nairobi Declaration, you know about the Inflation Reduction Act and the Net Zero Industry Act and the Earthshot. Give us your view about what should we be focusing on as some of the key pillars for the asset allocation strategy as part of this investment allocation plan to establish African green industrial infrastructure as a global investable asset class, and then the Nairobi Declaration is the equivalent of the Net Zero Industry Act or the Inflation Reduction Act, something that really positions us to unlock real value from the
So for context, we advise asset owners with about 16 trillion in assets on an ongoing basis, and we touch a larger community of institutional asset owners through some digital offerings that try to match up different investment opportunities with their needs. My suggestion is to position African green infrastructure as a subset of global emerging and frontier markets infrastructure and green infrastructure. And I say that because when you look at most institutional asset owners, only a subset are investing in infrastructure, only a subset are investing in private equity. They tend to start home country and then global developed market and then go on from there. So they'll get to the decision on emerging and frontier markets in general before they get to an African regional mandate. And I'm also suggesting that because there's different ways that investors get to African green infrastructure. And one very strong way is just on the risk return case. The flip side of African deals, African projects, having a high cost of capital is that's a high expected return for investors. So when they put that in their asset allocation model, when we put that in our asset allocation model, the expected returns look great. The cap rates, the yields, whatever we look at looks great, highly competitive. And then from a risk standpoint, the diversification potential is huge because you're getting exposure to 54 underlying countries in a region where local economic growth is not highly correlated with most of the rest of the planet. So a huge opportunity for diversification. And I've yet, in 31 years of advising on asset allocation, yet to have investors look at the case for emerging frontier markets infrastructure, emerging frontier markets private equity, and not go ahead and do that in cases where they're already invested in developed market equivalent. That's before we get to impact. So on impact, I think the suggestion is to tell a very strong story about the marginal benefit from an impact perspective of putting the next dollar in Africa is stronger than for just about anywhere else on the planet. And in other sessions at COP, you've probably heard the amount of money going into renewable energy globally, as an example, is way up, but it's up mainly in the developed markets. And that's where we've already bent the emission curve. We need to bend the emission curve in Africa. We need to bend the emission curve more generally in developing countries. So the marginal benefit of putting the next dollar into those countries is much higher from an impact perspective. And I think having a very strong risk return thesis plus a very strong impact thesis will get the money deployed. Most of the institutional asset owners that we work with are going to come through a general partner and diversified fund, so that if they have the risk budget and tell the GP, we want global emerging frontier markets exposure, some of that money will go to Africa. If they're big enough to do regional specialist mandates, then you get to the African story. But I think a prerequisite to that is just to get the allocation made to emerging frontier market infrastructure, emerging frontier market private equity, and whether it's direct investors or GPs, they'll then find the opportunities that we're talking about here.
Thank you, Rich. So now let's come hear from Musa, as I mentioned before. He runs the largest pension fund on the African continent. So tell us, and he's obviously a great supporter of the African Union's 5% agenda, understands institutional investor-public partnerships. So from that perspective, Musa, can you just sort of give us your view about, what ideas and recommendations you think we should be putting into this, investment allocation plan for the Earthshot that will catalyze more African institutional investors like yourselves, and then of course be able to hopefully crowd in more colleagues like Gunter and the global institutional investment community. Two African green infrastructures.
Thank you, Hubert. I think the most important from an institutional investor perspective, especially a pension fund, would be to uplift the infrastructure, especially green infrastructure, not from a project-based investment perspective, but make it an asset class. As already been mentioned, group all the projects and make these Africa green investments into an asset class that is investable. So going forward, we're investing in infrastructure, green infrastructure to be specific, as an investable asset class. As long-term investors, pension funds are in it for the long term. We will look into infrastructure, especially green infrastructure, addressing some of the SDGs from a partnership perspective to address some of the challenges that we're facing as a globe, but also to expect the returns that have already been mentioned over the long term. What it will do for us as a partnership is we're taking out some of the challenges that we're having in identifying individual projects, but going into an asset class that is grouped together with all the returns that have been classified for all investors, and then we look at addressing all our challenges together. So partnerships is important for us. We've demonstrated that in South Africa, where 17 of some of the largest retirement funds have pulled together funds and attack investments in infrastructure. And that has realized in 1 year, for example, we've invested $400 million in identifiable renewable projects within a space of 12 months, where that was not possible before without the partnerships that were done within the retirement fund space. So partnerships, as well as elevating green infrastructure into an asset class that will work and be attractive for retirement funds.
Thank you very much, Musa. Now let's move to Gunter. As I mentioned, on the board of Allianz, chairs probably one of the largest, if not the largest, networks convened by the United Nations of global institutional investors, the Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance. And I think the world in the global institutional market has this perspective that there just isn't really a bankable or investable at-scale pipeline of projects on the continent. So I'm really interested, and I know Gunter's been a great supporter. We've just put out as a collective of institutional investors, a call to action statement to the key stakeholders, multilateral development banks, heads of state. We issued it just this week. It was essentially going out to, we represent about $100 trillion worth of institutional investors as part of that institutional investor group on climate change, amongst many others. So, Gunther, if you could just help us understand from your perspective how you would see the African as well as the global institutional investment community playing a different sort of more forward-looking role in developing that pipeline of bankable transactions, as I mentioned to Pablo from the NEC partnerships. You know, there's a very clear and specific role that we could play. You'd like to get consultants to come in and advise you on your green hydrogen strategy as part of your NDCs, or you could work with an institutional investor that's probably got some of the best and most proven green hydrogen project developers in the portfolio. We believe if you sit down with us and those companies, you've potentially got the money behind the company, you've got the company with the expertise, and you can save governments, project preparation, all of the administrative issues. Do you see that type of partnership being able to deliver at scale through the likes of the Earthshot, through the likes of the and institutional investor public partnership? And if so, how would we do that? So over to you. A simple question.
Thank you. You mentioned that we are 20 trillion big. This is not right. We are 10 trillion big. But we can become 20 trillion big if we do, for instance, what we discuss here, right. At least we can make a step. And that's why I'm actually sitting here. I'm not going to now explain again what the problems are. You know all these problems. The solution that we would like to offer is documented, as Google says. We have issued all kinds of position papers, how we want to work with development banks, how we want to work with project owners. And it is very much what Hubert already explained, and sorry for repeating it now. We do believe that we can be asked to work on project development. We can give the support, we can give certain form of advice. We don't believe we are going to do this because afterwards we get exclusivity or are allowed to only discuss with you these projects. We fully understand that if projects are properly developed, that you of course will go out to the market and use the competitive landscape. You will auction it out, you will look for the best financing, of course you will. But we do think we should work on developing these projects together with you, because otherwise this auction out is never going to happen. This is exactly the problem that you are right at the beginning of this panel. There is the money waiting for the project and projects are waiting for the money. Yes, you know it. This is what we offer. We can work with governments on the development of project pipelines. We can go even further. If you now do think you don't want to reach out to individual investors, the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance is convened by UN financial institutions, UN environmental program financial institutions. The secretariat of that initiative is the UN. You can contact the UN. And then some of these colleagues who are members of the Asset Owner Alliance, they are ready to work on project definition, on orchestrating who may be partners to actually join on and join in. And I repeat, this is not to be understood because then this is individual, certain selected financial institutions working on it. No, we want to first build the bridge, and then, of course, the project owners decide with who they are going to work. We do think we need to communicate this so clearly. Why? Because otherwise this gap, I repeat it again, between projects looking for money, money looking for projects will never be closed. So the investors need to step forward and need to be willing to give advice to help indeed to make these projects, as you will call it, bankable. And that's what we indeed put out there. Let's assume there is something like a target picture of your energy market. Let's assume you know what infrastructure pipelines you actually need to come to this infrastructure, to this energy market in 2030. Let's assume you can then talk to certain capital market participants who can give you advice how these projects can become bankable. This may be actually a solution, and there's not much more needed than what we just described in terms of reaching out to these investors. And I say, There is a secretariat provided by the United Nations, so you have actually a very neutral platform to which you can reach out and talk. Is there, let's say, an investor group who can help? Mobility investing is first designing the project, make it bankable, and later on you auction out.
Thank you very much, Clinton. I think that's a very strong and compelling partnership if you're working with African pension funds, African sovereign wealth funds, and then bringing in colleagues right there. We have the domestic investment, and then we have the global crowding at scale if you work together from the beginning. I'm going to call you now, Solomon. You've worked right across all of the different industries. Just to give you your view on that same perspective about how asset owners in Africa and asset owners around the world potentially scale up that project to pipeline components.
Thank you very much, Hubert, and thank you for the invitation. So I'm the CEO of the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund based in Accra, Ghana, the country's sovereign wealth fund. And we focus on investing in infrastructure assets across Ghana. The government set us up initially with around $250 million, which is a significant investment for the country, but small compared to the needs of the country in the infrastructure space. We have now managed to raise that to double it to almost $500 million. And we've done $350 million worth of investments in infrastructure assets. Most interestingly, for every $1 that we've put in an investment, we've managed to bring in $10 of other people's money to complement our investments. So when our projects are completed, there'll be over $3 billion worth of investments in infrastructure in Ghana. And the reason why I mentioned that is because that is how you have impact. You really need to leverage other sources of financing to have your impact. And the issue of money and bankable projects not meeting each other enough, I think one of the solutions is the countries in Africa now beginning to establish individual sovereign wealth funds. And those sovereign wealth funds play a very unique role. They are owned by the sovereign, so they have all the weight of the sovereign behind them. But they usually have a degree of independence to make investment decisions that are in tune with what the private sector may be more familiar with. So you get the combination of two. So as an ideal anchor partner in a country that's trying to attract capital, if the local sovereign wealth fund is well run, it's a natural place to actually anchor those investments and give those international financiers or investors comfort that they've got the backing of the sovereign, but also comfort that they're working with an institution that looks at private sector principles. And really, that's the only way you're really going to leverage the private sector to come and to fill those gaps that we spoke about. So I think that's one very important aspect of it. The second important aspect that I would really emphasize is once we build the infrastructure, once we de-risk it, and the underlying infrastructure is generating regular cash flows, we will then sell to the local pension funds and recycle our money and put it in the next project, thereby bringing the pension funds at the de-risk stage, which is then much more comfortable coming in at that stage. Let me give you an example. We're in the process of doing what will be the first major toll road project in Ghana. The initial money that's going to build the first stretch will come through the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund. On completion, we will then raise funding and refinance out and bring the private sector once the tolls have been established, thereby reducing the risk for the investors later. So it's just an example of how these things can work to really leverage the public sector and the private sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Solomon. I'm going to move to Eric, and then I'm going to call on our guests Vera to just give us some of her reflections. And Eric is from CDPQ, which is probably one of the largest global infrastructure investors in the world, out of Canada. And we had a very interesting engagement on a discussion where we were from a panel in New York, and you talked about soft dynamics. When you're in the meetings and the investment committees and talking to some of your trustees, there are other issues that you think are really important. And I think one of the points that you touched on is the comfort of knowing that there is an official institution on the continent or an official institution that has influence within the continent. I think we were talking about NDBs. And then we said that surely African pension and sovereign wealth funds, if you could go into investment committees explaining that there's a co-investment partner, that will give a lot of confidence outside of the fundamentals of the transaction. So perhaps you might expand on that just a little bit.
Sure, thank you very much, Hubert, and thank you for the invitation to join. You're right, because there's technical challenges, and I won't repeat those. Gunter and others have addressed them. But then there's the psychological challenges, and let's consider that for a second. Pension funds tend to be intrinsically conservative bodies. They report to their boards, and they report to their, in our case, our depositors, because it's their money. And that conservatism leads to something of a fear of the unknown. And that's normal. I think that's a human nature that's probably pretty universal. And because of that, it takes extra convincing to bring people along to invest in new markets simply where they've never been before. They lack that experience. They lack what I like to call the 911 button. Whether, for us, we're based in Canada, we have a long-standing relationship in the United States, we have long-standing presence in Europe. When things go wrong, and things do go wrong, because if things didn't go wrong, there'd be no risk and there'd be no returns. So things will inevitably go wrong. They know who they can call. They have that 911 button. We have our series of dense relationships with governments, with other co-investors, other representatives of the private sector. And so there's a comfort with that the risks can be managed. Unfortunately, across Africa or a lot of other emerging economies, we don't have that dense network of relationships yet. And so one of the ways to try and fast-track this, because to develop those is a long, almost a generational process that would take 20, 30 years. But we need to fast-track that if we're going to reach the goals of 2030 and 2050. So we need to think about how to do that. And one great example, as Hubert mentioned, is partnering with local pension funds and sovereign funds in the region who have second to none knowledge of their local economies, are generally well connected to the business and political communities, and can serve as those intermediaries that can provide that comfort level to those who have very little familiarity with the market. There's other partners too. The World Bank, the multilateral development banks, even the United Nations. Even though the United Nations is not a financial institution, it has presence in virtually every developing country in the world and long-standing political ties. So thinking about clever ways of leveraging the United Nations presence to bring more comfort to institutional investors in these markets, in addition to the local pension and sovereigns, the multilateral development banks, bilateral development finance institutions or national development banks, forging those partnerships. That's sort of the shortcut to the much longer hard work that we'll need to do over 20 or 30 years to develop those dense network of relationships to bring the same level of comfort in Africa as we would in, say, the United States. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. And I think there's no one better given our extensive work in this area across so many different areas. I'm going to pull on Dr. Somewhere here just to give her reflections on that and how this risk can be managed. And in a lot of cases, we don't have those 20 to 30 years. We're looking at the silver bullet for the scale right now. So Vera, please actually do your share reviews. And don't worry, the comfort will be there for the depositors. There's a great opportunity here. Over to you, Vera.
I was just going to say that if it's 20 to 30 years, it's not an offshore, it's a crib shot. And we do need an Earthshot. No, thank you very much. Listen, I think one way of doing exactly what you said is working in partnership, and I want to thank all of you on the stage, CPDQ, AXA, and Rich from Mercer, for really, I think once you come in onto the continent with Mercer, for example, you're now putting up this platform that is going to show bankable projects, and we're working with them to help, and with Mahmoud to actually then help, get the Brookfields and the Macquaries of the world. When they go to a Mercer platform, biggest in the world guy, and they say, okay, this guy is putting up this project, that is already that part of the credibility that comes immediately. And I was shocked, at Onga to see the number of people in the room because Mercer called them. we would, they won't come. And so really I just want to thank you really, because what you're solving is this sort of, we don't have projects on the continent problem. If I had put up the platform, if the UN had put up the platform and it was work with Mahmoud and many others that did it, people will not go to that page. But they go to your page immediately. And as the CEO doing this, I think for us it's really important. I think that this is what we're looking for. The same thing with AXA and NEOS on the insurance side. We just released a report, so I didn't do my 2 minutes of publicity on the report, but it's more for the Egyptian COP and for the UAE COP. And out of this report came the finance declaration and the $30 billion that was done by His Excellency Sultan, and the 4.5 billion is part of the conversation that is in here. And I'll give you the thing, it's co-chaired by Lord Stern. But the finance declaration that was done at the COP with all the big countries is part of this report. And what we say there is that we need guarantees, we need to de-risk. But the best de-risking tool is actually getting a Mazda, getting ANOC, getting Amir Power to come and open an industry on the continent that buys those and produces, Mazda is never going to go out of business, and they will be producing solar panels for the next 25 years. So if there was an industry on the continent that was working to produce those solar panels and Mazda was the offtake, we will not need guarantees, we will not need de-risking, we will not need credit enhancement. All of those things will be Mazda. Mazda will be our off-taker. And immediately he would have de-risked everything that we're doing. And I think that is what is called the Earthshot and the green industrial conversation, is we don't want to bring our minerals here. And you walk around and you see all the steel that is happening here, and you think about Egypt, and you think about Mauritania, the iron ore that they're producing, and the steel that is being produced there. We could trade, but we're not trading. And if we start trading and producing on the continent, the reason why our utilities are not doing so well is that there is no business that is buying the energy from the utilities. There is no people that have jobs so that they can pay for the energy from the utilities. So we need governments to provide subsidies, and then we need MDBs to de-risk it and to guarantee it. But the model at the origin is wrong. And so until we fix the model at the origin, and Hubert, I think, thank you very much to President Ruto and everybody that is doing that. If we don't fix that supply chain, it does not work. And really happy that the UAE presidency has taken this up as a key part of what they're pushing. And so thank you, Hubert, for putting this conversation on the agenda, Mahmoud, Nados, everybody that is here, but also to you institutional investors. We don't have the 40 years. But I think as you work with us, the other thing that we must do is do all of this in local currency so that we don't take the huge FX risk that we are taking, which makes it even more difficult for us to do the project that your toll road. The people who are going to be driving on that toll road are going to be paying you in Ghanaian cedis and not in dollars. If you go to the market and borrow in dollars, it becomes immediately expensive when the Fed tightens, because that immediately triples your borrowing cost. These are the things that we need to begin to work on to make sure that this Earthshot really becomes, something that we can see in 2 years when we meet in 2030 at the Brazilian COP, that we have actually deployed the UAE resources and are beginning to see some concrete results. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. Please join me in a big round of applause for our speakers here. Everyone asks, where's the institutional investment community? Where's the pension funds? Where's the global institutional investors? I think this was just the beginning of demonstrating to you, how much of a strong partner you already have in us. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much to our speakers. I feel like I was listening in on a masterclass for how to bridge the gap between projects and investments and projects around green infrastructure while meeting different types of investors where they were. Truly thank you all for those thoughts and comments. And Hubert, of course, thank you to you for your tenacity, for your vision, for your tireless commitment to getting us to this point.
Doing business in Africa, you can't afford to be without Africa Investor.